Professor Eleanor Grant sat at her desk in the small classroom of Columbia Grammar Preparatory School, reminiscing about her decades-long teaching career. Her frail hands trembled slightly as she graded her last batch of essays. At 75, she had seen thousands of students come and go, but one had stood out this year: Barron Trump, a towering yet soft-spoken young man whose humility and kindness had touched her heart. It wasn't easy teaching in a world where celebrities often commanded attention for the wrong reasons. When Barron first joined her class, Eleanor braced herself for arrogance, expecting him to rely on his status. Instead, she found a student who listened intently, thanked her after every lesson, and stayed behind to help tidy the classroom. That afternoon, Barron's towering figure appeared at the door, his usual security detail waiting discreetly in the hall. "Good afternoon, Professor Grant," he began, his voice steady but warm. "Do you have a moment?" Before she could answer, a commotion erupted outside. A middle-aged man barged into the hallway, yelling at the guards. His entitled demeanor unsettled the air. Barron frowned, but stayed calm. "Please, Professor, stay inside," he said quietly, closing the door. Unbeknownst to Eleanor, this was just the beginning of a day she would never forget. The muffled shouting outside the classroom grew louder, and Eleanor's curiosity got the better of her. She peeked through the window on the door, catching sight of the rude man confronting Barron's guards. His face was red with anger as he waved a stack of papers. "You think you're above the rules just because you're rich and famous?" he spat. Barron stepped into the hallway, his tall frame exuding calm authority. "Sir," he said, his voice measured, "if there's an issue, we can resolve it without hostility." But the man's anger only escalated. "Don't patronize me, kid. You think you can buy respect? People like you make me sick." Eleanor's heart raced. She feared for Barron's safety. But what happened next surprised her. Instead of retaliating, Barron motioned for one of his guards to call the police. "Let's de-escalate," he said. The man lunged toward Barron, but the guards restrained him effortlessly. Moments later, the police arrived, arresting the man for trespassing and disorderly conduct. Barron turned back to Eleanor's door, his expression calm but determined. "Are you okay, Professor?" he asked, his concern genuine. Eleanor nodded, overwhelmed by the young man's composure and kindness. Later that evening, as the sun cast a golden glow over the campus, Barron returned to Professor Grant's classroom. He knocked gently before stepping inside. "I'm sorry about earlier," he said, his voice sincere. "That man, he wasn't targeting you, but I'm sorry you had to witness it." Eleanor waved her hand dismissively. "You handled it remarkably well, Barron. I've seen grown men crumble under less pressure." Barron smiled faintly. "I've learned that staying calm is the best way to handle things." He hesitated before continuing. "Professor, you've given so much to your students. I've been thinking of a way to thank you, but I need your permission." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Permission for what?" Barron's smile widened, though he didn't elaborate. "It's a surprise," he said, "but I promise it'll mean a lot." Despite her curiosity, Eleanor trusted him. "All right, Barron," she said. "I'll leave it in your hands." As he left, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary was about to happen. Little did she know, Barron's plan would soon bring tears to her eyes and leave an indelible mark on her heart. The following day, Barron met with his security team and personal assistant in a quiet corner of the library. His idea was simple yet profound. A gesture that would show Professor Grant how much she meant to him and the countless students she'd mentored over the years. "She's retiring soon," Barron explained, his voice tinged with urgency. "I want her to feel appreciated, not just by me, but by everyone she's touched. Can we make that happen?" One of his guards nodded. "Whatever you need, sir. Just give us the details." Barron spent the next hour carefully crafting a plan. He wanted every piece of it to reflect the profound respect he had for Professor Grant. He reached out to her former students, colleagues, and even her family. The idea wasn't just a gift, it was a celebration of her life's work. As the plan unfolded, Barron's sincerity touched everyone involved. Calls and emails poured in from people eager to participate, sharing heartfelt stories about how Professor Grant had changed their lives. By the end of the meeting, the library was buzzing with quiet excitement. "This has to stay a surprise," Barron reminded his team. "She deserves nothing less than perfection." Later that evening, Barron sat alone in his dorm room, flipping through the notes he'd collected from former students. One letter caught his eye. A faded piece of paper written decades ago by a struggling student who had almost dropped out. "Dear Professor Grant, I just wanted to say thank you. You didn't give up on me when I'd already given up on myself. Because of you, I'm graduating today." The letter ended with a simple signature. Matthew R. Barron couldn't shake the emotion that washed over him. Matthew R. wasn't just a name. It was a testament to the kind of person Professor Grant was. She didn't just teach, she uplifted. With newfound determination, Barron decided the letter needed to be part of the surprise. He contacted Matthew, who now lived halfway across the country, and asked if he'd be willing to read the letter aloud. Matthew's voice cracked with emotion over the phone. "For her, I'd do anything." The pieces were falling into place, and Barron knew this would be a moment no one would forget. The days leading up to the big surprise were a whirlwind of planning and coordination. Barron enlisted the help of a few trusted classmates to decorate the campus auditorium with photos and memorabilia from Professor Grant's career. "It has to be perfect," Barron kept saying, his tall frame hunched over a table filled with notes and designs. Despite his status, he was hands-on, staying late into the night to ensure every detail was flawless. On the morning of the event, Barron made one last call to Professor Grant's daughter, who had flown in secretly to attend. "She has no idea," her daughter said, laughing softly. "She just thinks we're having lunch." Barron smiled. "Good. That's exactly what we want." As the auditorium filled with students, faculty, and alumni, the anticipation grew. Security stood discreetly at the entrances, ensuring everything went smoothly. Barron glanced at his watch, his heart pounding. It was time to bring Professor Grant to the auditorium. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Let's do this," he said, stepping into the hallway. Little did she know, her life was about to change in the most beautiful way. Professor Grant was enjoying a quiet lunch in the staff lounge when a knock on the door interrupted her solitude. To her surprise, it was Barron, his usual composed demeanor accompanied by a warm smile. "Professor," he began, "would you mind coming with me? There's something I'd like to show you." Eleanor blinked, a mix of curiosity and amusement spreading across her face. "Show me? What is it?" "It's a surprise," Barron replied, his eyes twinkling. "But trust me, you won't want to miss it." Eleanor chuckled softly. "Well, how can I say no to that?" As they walked through the halls together, Eleanor couldn't help but notice how other students and staff greeted Barron with admiration. Despite his high-profile background, he was deeply respected by everyone around him. When they reached the auditorium doors, Barron paused. "Close your eyes for just a moment, Professor." Eleanor raised an eyebrow but complied, allowing herself to be gently guided inside. The sound of murmurs and quiet footsteps surrounded her, adding to the mystery. "All right," Barron said, his voice steady but filled with excitement. "You can open them now." As Eleanor opened her eyes, she gasped. The auditorium was transformed into a beautiful tribute to Professor Grant's life and career. The walls were adorned with photos of her with students from decades past, framed quotes of gratitude, and banners that read, "Thank you, Professor Grant." Eleanor's eyes widened as she took in the sight of the crowd. Former students, colleagues, and family members she hadn't seen in years. Tears welled up in her eyes as a wave of applause erupted, echoing through the room. Barron stood beside her, his towering figure a calming presence. "This is for you, Professor," he said softly. Eleanor shook her head in disbelief. "Barron, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he replied. "You've spent your life giving to others. Today, we're giving back to you." As she was guided to the stage, Eleanor noticed familiar faces in the crowd. Students she'd taught decades ago, now grown with families of their own. Each one smiled at her with deep appreciation. Their presence attested to her impact. By the time she reached the microphone, Eleanor was overwhelmed with emotion, but the surprises weren't over yet. Eleanor wiped a tear from her cheek as the first speaker approached the podium. It was Matthew R., the author of the heartfelt letter Barron had discovered. "Professor Grant," Matthew began, his voice shaking with emotion, "you saved me. I was a scared, failing student with no direction, and you gave me the confidence to believe in myself. I wouldn't be here today without you." As he read the letter aloud, the room fell silent. Eleanor's tears flowed freely as she remembered the struggling young man Matthew had once been. She had no idea her encouragement had stayed with him all these years. One by one, others stepped forward to share their stories. How Eleanor had stayed late to tutor them, encouraged them to chase their dreams, and inspired them to never give up. Each story added another layer to the profound impact she had made. Barron watched from the side of the stage, his heart full. He'd always admired Professor Grant, but hearing these stories deepened his respect for her. The final speaker was Eleanor's daughter, who hugged her mother tightly before saying, "Mom, we're all so proud of you. This is your legacy." Eleanor's voice cracked as she finally addressed the audience. "This is the most beautiful gift I've ever received. Thank you, all of you." As the applause faded, Barron stepped forward holding a small box wrapped in elegant paper. He stood next to Professor Grant, towering over her, yet his demeanor was gentle and respectful. "Professor," he began, his deep voice steady, "there's one more thing I wanted to give you." Eleanor turned to him, her eyes shimmering with gratitude. "Barron, you've already done so much. What could possibly top this?" He handed her the box, smiling softly. With trembling hands, Eleanor untied the ribbon and carefully peeled back the wrapping. Inside was a beautifully crafted golden pendant in the shape of an open book, inscribed with the words, "To the teacher who opened 1,000 doors." But there was more. Tucked beneath the pendant was a letter written in Barron's neat handwriting. As she read it silently, tears streamed down her face. "Professor Grant, you've taught me more than any textbook ever could. You've shown me the power of kindness, humility, and perseverance. This pendant is a small token of my gratitude for the doors you've opened for me, and so many others." With deepest respect and love, Barron, the room erupted into applause once more, as Eleanor hugged Barron tightly, her voice breaking. "Thank you, Barron. This means more than I can say." After the event, the crowd began to disperse, but Eleanor remained on stage, overwhelmed by the love and gratitude she had received. Barron stayed by her side, offering quiet support. "You know," she said, her voice still shaky, "when I started teaching, I never imagined moments like this. I just wanted to make a difference, no matter how small." Barron nodded. "You made a difference, Professor, a big one. And I think everyone here today would agree." As they sat together on the edge of the stage, Eleanor looked out at the now empty auditorium. "You're wise beyond your years, Barron," she said. "I've taught thousands of students, but you've got a rare heart." Barron smiled modestly. "I've had good role models, Professor, including you." The two sat in comfortable silence, the weight of the day settling in. For Eleanor, it was a moment of validation for a lifetime of dedication. For Barron, it was a chance to give back to someone who had shaped him in ways words couldn't fully express. Outside the auditorium, the middle-aged man who had caused the earlier scene sat handcuffed in a police car, his anger replaced by shame. The commotion had long since died down, but Barron couldn't forget the man's bitterness. After ensuring Professor Grant was safely escorted home, Barron approached the officers. "May I speak with him for a moment?" The guards hesitated, but eventually nodded. The man looked up as Barron approached, his face a mix of frustration and embarrassment. "What do you want? To gloat?" Barron shook his head. "Number I want to understand. Why did you do it?" The man sighed, his shoulders slumping. "I lost my job last month. My daughter's tuition is due, and I guess seeing you, someone who has everything, just brought out the worst in me. I'm sorry." Barron's expression softened. "I'm sorry you're going through that, but lashing out won't fix it." He handed the man a card. "This is a friend of mine who runs a job placement agency. Call them. They'll help." The man's eyes widened in disbelief. "Why would you help me after what I did?" Barron smiled faintly. "Because kindness matters. Take care of yourself." As Barron walked back into the quiet auditorium, his mind lingered on the man from earlier. Despite the chaos, Barron had chosen compassion, a lesson he'd learned from observing people like Professor Grant. The room was nearly empty now, save for a few lingering guests packing up decorations. Eleanor's daughter approached Barron with tears in her eyes. "Barron, I don't know how to thank you for this," she said. "My mom is overwhelmed with joy. She keeps saying it's the best day of her life." Barron smiled. "She deserved every moment of it. She's an incredible person." Eleanor appeared moments later, her pendant shining under the soft light. She hugged Barron once more, her embrace filled with gratitude. "Barron, you've given me a gift I'll never forget. I hope you know how proud I am of you." As the last of the guests departed, Barron stood alone on the stage, reflecting on the day. He didn't see himself as a hero, but today he realized how small acts of kindness could create ripples that touched countless lives. Little did he know, his gesture would soon inspire even more change. News of the event spread quickly through the school and beyond. Photos of Professor Grant's celebration appeared online, along with heartfelt posts from attendees. Former students shared their stories on social media, praising Barron for organizing such a meaningful tribute. The post even caught the attention of a local news station, which aired a segment about the celebration. The clip highlighted Barron's humility and the profound impact of Professor Grant's teaching. Back at the college, students who hadn't known Professor Grant personally were moved by her story. They began sharing their own messages of gratitude for the teachers who had shaped them. Barron was flooded with messages, not just from peers, but from strangers who were inspired by his actions. Despite the attention, he remained humble, redirecting praise to Professor Grant. "This wasn't about me," he told reporters. "It was about honoring someone who dedicated her life to helping others." His words struck a chord, sparking a wave of appreciation for educators across the country. Barron's quiet act of kindness had turned into a movement. One evening, as Barron sat in his dorm room reflecting on the whirlwind of the past few days, he received a letter in the mail. The handwriting was familiar. It was from the man who had caused the scene outside the classroom. "Dear Barron, I don't know if you'll ever truly understand how much your kindness meant to me. After our conversation, I reached out to the agency you recommended. They not only helped me find a job, but they also gave me hope during one of the darkest times in my life. My daughter cried when I told her she could stay in school. I owe that to you. Thank you for seeing me as more than my mistakes. I promise to pay this kindness forward." Gratefully, James Barron folded the letter and sat quietly, his heart full. In that moment, he realized that the ripple effects of kindness went far beyond what anyone could see. Barron shared the letter from James with Professor Grant during one of their final meetings before her retirement. As she read it, her eyes filled with tears, and she placed a gentle hand on Barron's. "This," she said, holding the letter aloft, "is the greatest proof that what you did mattered. You didn't just honor me. You set an example for everyone around you." Barron nodded thoughtfully. "I didn't expect it to go this far. I just wanted to show you how much you mean to all of us." "You've done far more than that, Barron," she replied. "You've inspired a wave of kindness, and that's a legacy to be proud of." Meanwhile, James kept his promise to pay kindness forward. With his new job, he began volunteering at a local food bank, helping others in need. He even shared his story with the people he helped, reminding them that one act of compassion could change a life. Barron's gesture was no longer just an isolated event. It had become a beacon of hope, a movement of gratitude and kindness that rippled through countless lives. The day of Professor Grant's retirement ceremony arrived. The entire college gathered to honor her one last time, with students and staff alike eager to celebrate her legacy. Barron had been asked to deliver the opening speech. Dressed in a sharp suit, he approached the podium with a mixture of pride and emotion. "Professor Grant," he began, his voice steady, "you've dedicated your life to shaping minds and hearts, and the impact of your work is immeasurable. You've not only been a teacher, but a mentor, a friend, and an inspiration to so many of us." As he spoke, the audience listened intently, many dabbing at their eyes. Barron concluded with a heartfelt message. "On behalf of everyone whose lives you've touched, thank you. Your legacy will live on in all of us." Eleanor stepped forward, embracing Barron with tears streaming down her face. The audience erupted into applause, a standing ovation for a woman who had given so much. It was a bittersweet farewell, but Eleanor knew she was leaving behind a legacy that would continue to grow, thanks in no small part to Barron. Months later, Barron received an unexpected package in the mail. Inside was a framed photo of him and Professor Grant from the retirement ceremony, along with a handwritten note. "Dear Barron, thank you for being the student every teacher dreams of having. Your kindness and vision have left a mark on my heart. Remember, the best lessons in life come from how we treat one another. Keep spreading that light with love and gratitude. Elena Grant." Barron placed the photo on his desk, smiling as he read the note. The events of the past year had taught him something invaluable. No matter how small, every act of kindness could create ripples that reached far beyond what one could imagine. As he prepared for the next chapter of his life, Barron knew he would carry these lessons with him, continuing to honor the values that Professor Grant had instilled in him. The story of Barron and Professor Grant became a source of inspiration for people everywhere, reminding the world of the power of gratitude and compassion. If this story moved you, the narrator continued, take a moment to reflect on the power of kindness in your own life. Who has inspired you, and how can you make a difference for someone else? Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment sharing your favorite part of the story. Let's keep the ripple effect going. Together, we can create a world filled with love and gratitude.